Always my soulmates. By Watermelon's Melon Felon. Chapter 18. Coligo. What's that, Casa? The child gestured to the white flower growing from the bush nearby. His mother smiled and led him on over so they could stare at the flower together. That is a coligo, Yukun. It's said to be the soulmate flower. If you speak into it, it is supposed to take a message to your soulmate. The coligo nearest to them will open, and your message will play for them to hear. Oh! After much begging, Yuri finally managed to convince his mother to take him out to get one of his own. It was illegal to pluck them, apparently. Coligo were eternal, and did not die so long as they remained healthy in their habitat. They grew all around the world, and many had some in their homes in hopes of connecting with their soulmate somehow. Yuri's knowledge on them continued to expand, and he wanted one for his room, if only because it was cool. He wasn't sure he'd know what to do if his soulmate ever responded, but that could come later. Having one would be enough. The legend of the coligo was a well-known one. It was often changed a bit to satisfy the region it was being told in, but the underlying message was the same. Still, the rewrite of the original was the most special in Yuri's opinion. A long time ago, in a kingdom on the verge of war with another kingdom, a young soldier learned that he was to be deployed in the early morning. With a heavy heart, he told his wife and children the grave news, and in their final hours together, the small family used their time to form stronger bonds. When the man left at dawn, it was in the wake of teary faces and well-wishes. His leader assigned him to a group of men just like he, fathers and husbands who missed their families despite not even setting out yet. On their journey, the groups of men became friends, sharing stories of their hardships and fortunes with one another in hopes of lightening the atmosphere. The man was grateful for his fellows whom he'd come to consider brethren. The hours passed on as they marched. And one morning the battalion was ambushed by the very army they had set out to face. The battle was brutal, and blood was slain. The night came upon them quickly, and the man was made to suffer as his comrades fell one by one before he could so much as blink. And in his desperation he fought off the rest of his enemies single-handedly, emerging victorious but with nothing to show for it. A wounded side, a bleeding face, and a hand missing 2 fingers. The battle had ravaged both groups, and only one had survived out of the thousands. The man fell to the ground, his body having given up. His pain was too much to bear, and in the darkness he recalled his wife and children, the very things that kept his chin up during his travels. And then, as if sensing his desire to speak with his wife at least one last time, the moon broke through the heavy clouds, shining upon his form and illuminating something. A flower. A single flower that had managed to survive the battle rested beside him. Its petals unfolded despite the fact that night had come upon the land. His wife had loved the flower more than anything, and in his last hours the man confessed his love and his wishes to the flower that so reminded him of his wife. Not once did he believe that anything could come of it. Yet the universe works in mysterious ways. For that very same flower was capable of more than any could ever truly understand, and the wife who had taken her children out to the fields to gaze upon the light of the moon heard his words coming from the nearby flora. Filled with resolve, the wife sent her children to their grandparents and gathered her wits about herself. Girding her loins, she borrowed a horse from a nearby stall, taking only the necessities with her, and heading off for her lover. She followed the path he'd taken mere days before. She rode swiftly and with purpose, sure that she would make it. The discomfort of the unfamiliar form of travel meant nothing. Her goal was in mind, and she would see it through, even if it meant she should perish. The woman traded the horse for another, and kept on into the night, where she rode on until morning. That horse was also traded for another, and she kept on, with only one mission in mind. On the 3rd day she came upon the battlefield of fallen soldiers, eyes scouring the ground for her husband. And in the distance there was a figure, not quite heaped over like all the others, leaning up against a tree. The man was asleep, unaware of her presence. His midsection was wrapped in white cloth, his left hand covered as well. Blood soaked through both fabrics, and he wasn't moving. Still, she had come this far for a reason. Kneeling before him, she carefully took his pulse and was relieved to feel breath against her face. Alive, but barely. Setting to work, she changed his bandages as efficiently as possible and redressed him in the clothing of a nearby soldier. Once said and done, she gripped his arm as carefully as possible, throwing it over her shoulder. Bending down, she shifted his weight across her back and steadily stood, grabbing his left leg with her other free hand. The wife moved slowly and carried him to the horse, depositing him on the creature's back. The wife and husband returned home many days later to face their fellows' questions, and in answering she spoke of the flower in the fields, singing the words of her husband loud and clear. And with hearts filled with amazement, each villager went out to pluck a flower and test the story for themselves. Finding it to be true, the flower was dubbed by their own king to be the flower of equal hearts. Or better said, unifier, a flower that showed love through only the most perfect of matches. The belief that each person was truly only half a being until they met their perfect match was what influenced the name. And from that day forth, the legend of the unifier, Koligo, was born. Obviously, Yuri ended up falling in love with the legend and decided that the story was too beautiful to ignore. So, in the deepest part of his heart, he hoped that his own soulmate could be as amazing as the wife in the legend. "Hello," a young Victor whispered to the flower. "I don't know if you can hear me, or even understand me, but I hope that one day we'll get to meet face to face, and that we will like each other very much." With a smile, Victor stepped away from the flower, whose petals folded in on itself for a moment. The petals unfolded a few seconds later, and words came out, though they were in a different language. The voice was young, so his soulmate had to be his age or a little younger, though he wished he could understand them. He did recognize one word, which was a name. The first word was given a pause, so he would assume it was a greeting. "Konnichiwa! Namae wa Yuri desu!" Switching to English, which was a more well-known language, Victor said, "I hope we can meet someday." The response was slow and not as well spoken, but Victor couldn't help but beam all the same. "Ano, that nice. Very nice. Yuri, I go now. Bye-bye. Goodbye." The flower petals stood still then, and Victor knew that his soulmate had gone. But still, their first interaction had gone well. "How do you know English well?" Yuri asked the flower, hoping that he wasn't interrupting his soulmate in any way. "Well enough," came the reply. "It is not your mother tongue either?" The voice was older and heavily accented. European, Yuri was certain. "No, I was born in Japan. We take English, though. I am doing well, I think. I can talk some." "Me as well. Though I have to meet and greet people a lot, so it's better to know more than one language." "What do you do for fun?" Yuri asked. "I skate on the ice." "Me too." And that was the day Yuri learned that his soulmate was also into figure skating. He couldn't have been any happier. Victor's Koligo was resting in a black pot that was covered in white polka dots. He was very careful when handling it because it was his closest link to his soulmate, who had begun a tentative relationship with him. Currently, they were teaching each other basics in their own languages, and Victor had to be impressed with Yuri, who was apparently 4 years younger than him. For an 11-year-old, he was very focused and determined. They hadn't shared much beyond their first names, but that was okay. It was more interesting to get to know each other without any pressure. Currently, Yuri was a figure skater, but was also a ballerino. He'd taken ballet first, but his friends had convinced him to start skating at their nearby rink, and he'd fallen in love with the sport. Yuri wanted to compete nationally, but he was experiencing some doubts. Victor was trying his best to encourage the other. They might even meet if Yuri did really well. What could be better than that? "I have anxiety problems," the other boy confessed. "I start to doubt, and then I ruin my jumps." "Then don't doubt yourself. Do your friends and family support you?" "Yeah." "And do you like skating?" "Yeah." "Then skate for yourself, not for the audience. When you do it for only you, you'll feel better." But don't you go and skate when you're nervous?" interrupted Victor. "Well, yeah, then you'll be doing the same thing then. No, I would advise you to take out your contacts so you can't see faces. Then it's just you and the ice." There was a moment of silence before Yuri's answer came back, filled with more excitement than Victor expected, so much that the flower petals shook. "That's great! If I can't see them, then it'll be just like I'm alone. Arigato!" Yuri blinked and looked around. He honestly couldn't see anything beyond the white of the ring and the blue of the wall enclosing it. Everything beyond them blurred into a dark brown color. The room was silent, and it was enough to pretend that he was alone and simply practicing in front of Yuko and Takashi. Closing his eyes, Yuri took a deep breath and waited for the music to begin. He hadn't expected to win that small Hasetsu competition, but it was a nice win all the same. And it was all because his soulmate was a genius! You're going to enter as many smaller competitions as you can until you're old enough to reach the juniors? Victor found his soulmate to be adorable. Unfortunately, Yuri's birthday was in November, so he couldn't join this year. But next year, he'd finally be able to join official national competitions and begin competing against better skaters. I shouldn't have to remind you that there will be others out there who will skate better than you. Yes, I know, Yuri said. So long as I reach the podium, I don't really mind. It was a refreshing viewpoint, especially since Victor was used to Yakov threatening his pupils should they not make it to the podium. Yuri's coach was a lot nicer. Victor? Yuri began slowly, sounding hesitant and maybe a little worried. Some people think that it's stupid that I like to do a lot of spins and spirals, because girls are supposed to do those in their routines, but boys don't have to. Suddenly annoyed, Victor rolled until he was kneeling on his bed, clutching the potted plant between stiff fingers. They're being stupid, Yuri! There is nothing saying boys can't do them. Besides, how else do you flush out the performance? You can't rely on only step sequences. I know, but some people call me names. Are any of them skaters or judges? No, but they pay them no mind. Bacchus, the lot of them. There was a giggle and the flower's petals wiggled a bit. I shouldn't have taught you that word. Nonsense! I've been using it non-stop and no one can figure out what I'm saying. It's great! Thank you for being nice, Piggy-chan. Victor flopped down on the bed once more. Thanks for keeping my days interesting. Son nisko moyo. I messed up so bad! Victor winced as the flower on his nightstand rattled violently. Yuri's voice was grief-stricken and was so loud it threatened to topple the flower in its own pot. Carefully, he took up the pot and fiddled it between his legs in order to keep it steady. What happened? Victor demanded. He and Yuri hadn't been able to talk recently, as Victor had been away at the Grand Prix finals, and Yuri had been busy as well, or so the other stated. I don't know what happened. I did so well, and then I just fell apart. Yuri, talk to me. What's wrong? My poodle passed away. I wasn't there for him. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. And when I found out, I just messed everything up. My performance was a wreck and I finished last with over 100 points between me and the winner. Victor winced. That wasn't exactly okay in the business of figure skating. What exactly were you performing? It might not be that bad. Victor, I came in last in the Senior Grand Prix final. That's really bad, okay? Victor's shock was all-encompassing. He reached for his mobile and began scrolling through the nearest website as quickly as he could. And to make it worse, this douche I've looked up to for years didn't even recognize me as a fellow competitor. Like, I get that life is busy, but how do you not know the names of the people you're skating against? How Chris even knows me? Though technically it's because he groped me in front of several people, but still! Victor's eyes landed on a photo of a familiar face, one that he had mixed feelings about. Because on the day he'd seen the other, he'd been put out that he hadn't accepted an invitation for a photo. But the results labeled him as Katsuki Yuri, the skater to finish in last place because of several falls and missed timing. So he hadn't even been a fan wanting a photo, he was a fellow competitor. And said fellow competitor just so happened to be Victor's soulmate. The soulmate who just admitted to admiring him for years and then called him a douche for not knowing his name, at least. And now Victor was feeling terrible. And on top of that, Chris was going around groping other people's soulmates. I'm sure you can come back from it next season, Victor tried, feeling guilty, and said, There won't be a next season, Vic-chan. No. I'm not really feeling skating anymore. Maybe that's why I messed up. You can't give up! Victor protested, unable to help himself. He hated the thought of giving up. I've lost my inspiration. I've lost my inspiration. Yet Victor could relate, because he too had lost his inspiration. He was just coasting by on the expectations of his fans and nothing more. Maybe you just need to take a break. There was a snort. A long break. The pedals stopped moving and everything fell silent. And Victor Nikiforov was left to consider much. Gatsky Yuri tried to skate Victor Nikiforov's FS program. Stay close to me. In Victor's humble opinion, the word tried should not even be in the title. Yuri, his soulmate, he had to remind himself, had brought life to a work that Victor had been so disappointed over. And only a week after Victor had performed it at the World Championships. A week compared to the months of hard work on that program. And while it had been months essentially since they had talked about anything that involved figure skating, this was a pleasant surprise. And amidst the rude comments and backlash, Victor was impressed and had left his own comment by sharing it to his Twitter. I thought it was beautiful. Let everyone make of that what they will. Still, Victor now had a plan in mind. Instead of sitting back and complaining over having no inspiration for the next season, he could go and help his soulmate rekindle his love for skating. Japan should prepare for the hurricane that was Victor Nikiforov. Victor Nikiforov was naked. Of all the things that Yuri thought he'd think about the other man, he had never considered that sentence to be it. But indeed, Victor Nikiforov in all his toned glory was naked in the onsen at Utopia Akatsuki, looking at Yuri as if he had some big secret. Oh, and he said he was going to be Yuri's coach. Great. As your coach, I want to know everything about you. No, he did not. And Yuri's traitorous mind kept pointing out that Victor was clothed only in a loose yukata and nothing else. Victor was touching him in places, touching his chin and his hand, and getting far too close for Yuri's comfort. His eyes were doing strange things. What do you think? The other man asked. Yuri fled, and when Victor asked to have a sleepover, he vehemently refused. And took the posters of Victor off his wall and shoved them between his mattresses. There were just some things that people did not need to know. Yuri was so adorable in person, and frustrating too. He was not the type to accept defeat gracefully, nor did he take direction well. Victor instructed him to run a mile, and he ran 5, just because. Victor told him that he had to lose a certain amount of weight, and Yuri lost 5 pounds more. He wanted Yuri to meditate for an hour, and Yuri would meditate for 2. He tried to get Yuri to let him sleep in his room, but Yuri would not budge. Anyone else would have gladly accepted his invitation and hoped that it meant that they assumed it meant, but not Yuri. Yuri, as your coach, I need to know everything important about you. He used the "as your coach" phrase a lot, but no matter how often, Yuri didn't budge. And then Yuri showed up, and Victor heard Yuri curse for the first time. Fuck that! They hadn't known he'd been there watching him, but he found it interesting that despite how much Yorio claimed that he didn't like Yuri, he still showed him the Salchow. Several times, in fact. And Yuri fell about 50% of the time, and when told that he should stop, he simply said, "Fuck that!" Making both Yurio and Victor gape in shock. Yuri wasn't the type to curse or insult people, so it was a bit of a shocker. After the competition and Yuri's victory, Victor had tried to find out exactly what Yuri's true inspiration was. No bowl of food would make someone that alluring, and Victor would not believe it for a second. It was impossible. So, of course, they celebrated with sake, and Yuri spilled the truth easily. He was talkative for a drunk, but had impeccable balance, even after sharing 3 bottles with Victor. Victor was certain it was ballet training coming to the surface. "I'm not a playboy," the others had slurred. "I don't really have the confidence to be one, or even attempt. So I asked Manako-sensei to teach me how to act more feminine. The playboy seducing the girls was too hard, but the temptress seducing the playboy came pretty naturally. I liked that version of the story more." Yuri had refined his entire routine, slipping into the mindset of a sexy woman who knew she was a great catch in order to pull off the short program Victor had choreographed for him. And who were you seducing? You. Victor's evening was quiet from then on. He had much to think about. You have a flower by your bed too! Victor, get out! My flower is at home. I hope it doesn't die while I'm away. Yuri won't remember to go and water it. Victor, come on! Victor was touching it. He was touching Yuri's 19-year-old flower. This seems very old, Victor commented, eyes turning serious. How long have you had it? Yuri looked away, unable to face Victor head on. Since I was 4. You've taken such good care of it. Your soulmate must be special to you. Thinking of Vic-chan, Yuri had to smile. More than you know. He wasn't exactly certain, but he thought he heard Victor reply, I wouldn't be so sure. That had to be the sexiest katsudon I've ever seen. Yuri buried his face in Victor's scarf. Of all the things to say to somebody, the Russian just had to go for those words. Still, Yuri was very pleased that he had finally managed his short program with a perfect score. And not only that, but a record-breaking one for himself. Also, he was reliably informed that it was higher than most of the short program scores Victor had ever gotten. Victor, you realized that I wasn't skating for food this time, right? I was skating for you alone. Victor's beaming grin died a little and his face began to flush. You told me to seduce you by being myself only, if you recall. Yuri added with a grin, enjoying how the other seemed to be so out of his element. It was rare for Victor to not be in perfect control of himself. Yuri relished every chance he could get to bring the other man back down to earth. It was fun. Hello, Yuri. Yuri sat up suddenly. The flower in his hotel room had suddenly moved, the petals wiggling as its message echoed in the room. Yuri had liked that each room came with a flower. It seemed more special to him that way. Vic-chan! His voice was even more familiar than before, as if Yuri was used to hearing it. That heavily accented English came through, and Yuri closed his eyes, contented more so than usual. How are you? Well, I went on a trip, and I've gotten to know some amazing people. They treat me like a normal person and don't pander to my every whim. I thought you liked having people fawn all over you, teased Yuri. When I was younger, perhaps, but I'm a grown man now. At 27, you know. Yuri had to pause. His Victor was the same age as... How curious. I have a friend. He's a bit shy at times, but can get really stubborn. I'm teaching him how to tap into his talents, and I think he's teaching me how to handle emotional situations. Strange. Victor was doing the same for him. A knock at the door caught his attention. Hold on a second, Vic-chan. Shuffling on over, Yuri threw open the door, coming face to face with his dear coach and friend. Except Victor was holding a golden go out of his mouth. I'll hold on as long as you want me to. The voice was strange, but a second later, they echoed out from behind Yuri, who glanced back at the flower on his nightstand. No way! Victor, are you your perfect match? Yes. The words also echoed, proving him to be correct. He wasn't joking. This wasn't some trick or auditory hallucination. It was really happening. His Vic-chan was actually Victor Nikiforov, and his coach was the same man. His soulmate. The person he'd been talking to for years, confiding in. Why had they never exchanged full names before? Victor's smile could fell angels. Yuri, would you come to dinner with me? When the question was repeated, Yuri had to reach out to push the flower down. It was beginning to get annoying. We go out all the time, but never as soulmates. Good point. And do you want to go out on a date with me, just so we're clear? Very much. I was so glad to learn that we were soulmates, but I wasn't sure of how to bring it up. Victor had known. How long had Victor known? How long? The day you told me you came in last. 7 months ago. Damn. I don't want to go out. Before Victor's face could fall into a pout, Yuri stepped aside. We could order in here and have our privacy. Beaming once again, Victor bounced through the door, though Yuri made sure to take his Koligo before he could get far with it. He wasn't dealing with that all evening. Hell no. He tossed it down the corridor and shut the door firmly behind himself. Victor, are you sure you want this? I'm not exactly the type you've gone for in the past. Victor sat up, eyeing Yuri's downcast expression with displeasure. I like you more than anyone I've ever met because you aren't like everyone else. Even being a huge fan of mine, you still respected my boundaries. That almost never happens. And despite having an obvious crush on me, you can manage to enunciate your words and make conversation. My opinion of you was already high since we'd known each other for years already, but to be introduced to you in person and to witness who you truly are cemented my adoration of you. You aren't fake, a little clumsy and adorable, but overall you're as great as I always thought you would be. Yuri flushed lightly, and Victor found himself pleased. You make me sound amazing, but I'm nothing like the warrior who fought off the rest of his foes on his own. Victor hummed, running his fingers through Yuri's messy hair. I always fancied the wife. She seemed to be the most interesting in my opinion, and far more courageous than the man. At Yuri's confused look, he added, She was not a soldier, and had not been trained in fighting or riding. She did not know the dangers she might face, yet she ventured out anyway. She did not rest the entire time, and took his weight upon herself and cared for him. That's far more stunning in my eyes, that her love was so strong, she'd do anything. Taking up Yuri's clenched fist, Victor smiled. I always wanted to be the wife of the legend, but perhaps if you are the wife, then me being the husband is so bad. Yuri stared for a moment before asking, When did we get into this metaphor? I honestly have no idea. Chuckles passed between them, and Yuri's shoulders sagged in relief. In short, Yuri, you are exactly my type, and more. No one ever has or will compare to you. The romantic ring to those words was ruined by the Koligo on the nightstand, opening up and repeating Victor's loud declaration. Never before had Yuri wanted to burn the flower more so than now.